Welcome to the We're Doing It Wrong podcast, a production of WDIW Media, hosted by Joseph Pazar and inspired by David Michael Slater's book, We're Doing It Wrong, 25 Ideas in Education That Just Don't Work and How to Fix Them. Today I bring you a conversation with Michael Linsin. Michael Linsin is the founder of Smart Classroom Management, the top classroom management blog on the web, with over 120,000 subscribers. He has taught every grade level from kindergarten through high school for the past 27 years, and is the author of 4 best-selling books. When he isn't writing and teaching, Michael enjoys hanging out with his wife, who's also a teacher, 2 dogs, and enjoys shooting a traditional English longbow. He lives in San Diego, California. I found my conversation with Michael Linsin to immediately indicate his expertise in the area of classroom management and how to thrive as a teacher. And that's really what our conversation gets to by the end of it, is how can teachers thrive in their jobs and be absolutely joyful in their work in spite of all the challenges we face. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. Without further preamble, I bring you Michael Linsin. And I'm here with Michael Linsin. Michael, thank you for coming on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So you have been doing quite interesting work with your Smart Classroom Management website and then the array of books you've been writing on the topic. And I had the pleasure of reading your latest book about the habits of happy teachers. So I want to incorporate some of that in our conversation as well. But to get us kick-started here, I noticed your website seems very successful, and you've written, as I mentioned, a plethora of books. At what point in your career did your success as a teacher begin to overflow beyond your classroom? And then were there any unexpected hurdles that you faced once your reach expanded?
Well, I was so focused on my career in my own classroom for the first 10, 12 years of my career, and it wasn't until then that I kind of started looking around and paying attention to what other teachers were doing and their experiences, and I realized that very few were enjoying their students and enjoying the classroom as much as I was. And so I sought to kind of figure out why that was, why so many teachers were struggling. And just a few short years later, I thought I'd learned enough from those teachers that I could maybe start providing some advice. And so I started the blog about 9 years ago. And I guess the only obstacle is that, at first you're kind of writing in an echo chamber. Nobody came to my blog. It took me 9 months to get my first 100 subscribers. So it was kind of slow going. But I enjoyed doing it, and I get good response from the people reading it. So I just kept at it.
Well, that's encouraging, I'm sure, for many an aspiring blogger out there on the internet. So when you began that work on your blog, was that before or after you started writing books that became published?
I wrote, I had a book called Dream Class, which was my first book, published in 2009, and I wrote that book, and just as it was coming out, I started the blog. So I started the blog as a way of not only connecting with teachers and kind of providing free advice, which I really wanted to do. I also, wanted a way to finance the blog because websites can be expensive, and so that's what I did. So they kind of came out simultaneously.
Oh, sure, yeah, I guess that makes sense. When you begin your writing career, you can begin it in many different forms. So you focus obviously on classroom management, and as I mentioned, your recent book, it's entitled Happy Teacher Habits, 11 Habits of the Happiest, Most Effective Teachers on Earth. Great title. You discuss the Pareto principle. I think that's how it's pronounced, but it's commonly known as the 80-20 rule. And while you use that idea as the premise of the book, sort of setting up this is why we need to pay attention to the things that matter, and here's what matters. I'm wondering how you would apply that principle specifically to classroom management for teachers. What are the things that teachers often focus on with regards to classroom management that don't actually matter that much, and what should they be focused on?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think the biggest mistake is that teachers believe that initially that they need to, through their personality and experiences in life and connection with kids, that they need to convince students to behave. And there are many ways of trying to do that. And a lot of common classroom management advice is kind of focused on that. And I think that gets them into a lot of trouble. It pulls them emotionally into, again, trying to convince, which often turns into coercion and intimidation, and they end up creating a lot of friction with their students. Whereas the focus should be on just relationships, not based on how the students are behaving, but just good relationships with students, building trust, having good leadership qualities, which we can talk about, and then letting a classroom management plan, a contract between the teacher and the students, take care of the misbehavior. And so in that way, we don't create friction with students. So we're just fulfilling a promise. And the promise is to protect the student's right to learn and enjoy school without interference. And so that's what a classroom management plan does, and that's the contract. The contract is that students follow these rules, and in return, we don't raise our voice, we don't intimidate, we don't scold, and create that friction between students. That's a big question you asked. I hope I answered it okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if you, and I think you talk about this maybe in a slightly different context in your book, but the extrinsic reward systems that some teachers invest so much time in. And I'm wondering if you would see that as not maybe just being a waste of time, but actually harming the outcomes you want to see with regards to classroom management.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's when we're trying to convince students to behave. That's one of the big areas of focus. And so teachers end up overpraising. So praising for expected behavior, praising for things that frankly aren't worthy of it, and then rewarding students in exchange for good behavior, which very effectively snuffs out intrinsic motivation, which is what we want. And in the end makes classroom management much more difficult, because the students are only listening or only performing when we bribe them to do so. And it makes your classroom a lot less interesting. It makes the relationship between students and teacher a cold-hearted exchange, and many other things that aren't good. I could go on and on.
Yeah, and I was thinking of those most difficult moments as a classroom teacher as being the moments where it's so easy for things to go wrong quickly. And you mention kind of visualizing those most intense moments and maybe rehearsing how you will react as a teacher to a variety of poor behavior choices on the part of students. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that. How can a teacher prepare for those sharp incidents that have a tendency to go wrong?
Well, first they need to know what to do. So they need to know, how to effectively handle those things or how to effectively respond to those things. And so when a teacher is standing in front of his or her classroom and they're unprepared, they're not sure what to do, then they just go by instinct. And instinct usually isn't good. Instinct is usually, well, okay, I'm going to pull the student aside and try to pep talk them, or try to tell them what they should think or how they should feel, or try to otherwise convince them to behave. And then that creates all sorts of problems. There's animosity between and resentment from the student. The student is so used to that kind of thing, and they've just heard it all a million times. And in their head, they're thinking, well, if I just endure this scolding or this lecture, that I can just go back and doing what I'm going to do. And so there's no real accountability. So the teacher's unprepared, and that's kind of the way they go. They need to understand what's the most effective response. And once they understand what that is, then they can rehearse. And I think it's really, really important that they do that. And what that does is that it makes their responses automatic. And so they don't rely on that instinct of grabbing a student and pulling them out in the hallway, or giving them a glare or dirty look or a reminder or things like that.
What would give us an example of maybe an incident and the proper way a teacher might address it in this idea of just following a classroom contract while focusing on relationships? What might that actually look like in an extreme case?
Well, it can be an extreme case, but really any case. So if a student breaks one of the rules that protect their learning and the teacher's freedom to teach, then the teacher just does what they say they're going to do. So when you're first teaching your classroom management plan to your class, you would model and role play exactly how you'll behave, exactly what you will do. So students know ahead of time that if they call out in class, for example, or they push someone on the way to line up for lunch, it doesn't matter what it is, then they know, first of all, they know exactly what does and doesn't constitute breaking each rule. So because we model it so explicitly, the student knows already that they crossed the line. So there's no convincing from the teacher that you can't, put your hands on a student, or you can't call out in class during direct instruction. And so once the student knows that, they already have chosen to cross the line. And so all the teacher is doing is following through with what they said they were going to do. So it may be just, it depends on the grade level, but it may be just approaching and saying, you have a warning because you broke rule number 2 and you didn't raise your hand before speaking. That's it. It's just informing the student. And the student knows, oh yeah, I understand. I knew ahead of time because it was taught thoroughly the first week of school. And I also know as a student, the teacher did exactly what they said they were going to do and exactly how they said they were going to do it. And so the accountability is all on me. There's no animosity. I'm not sitting there stewing in anger. Rather, I'm reflecting on my own misbehavior because it's all on me. The teacher was just a referee, just informing me, just doing what they said they're going to do, which actually improves trust and rapport and builds stronger relationships when you're honest and you follow through in a respectful manner. So the teacher's being respectful to the student, just saying, hey, you're interrupting the class in so many words, and this is the consequence.
Yeah, that's interesting. You had me thinking about maybe the different forms of power a teacher holds. So there's sort of this authority power. I mean, they're the person in charge, but that relational power. And I wonder if some teachers rely on that too heavily when trying to correct misbehaving students. In other words, the student's kind of like me. I've built a good relationship. So now when I go out there and I do this one-on-one interaction with a student, the student should change his or her behavior because that student likes me. It makes everything very personal. What I'm hearing is if you are a bit more professional, and I don't think detached is the right word, but if you just follow the contract as it's stated and as it was communicated, you actually bolster the relationship with the students. And I can imagine that if you try to use what relationship you've built to modify behavior directly, that may actually damage the relationship you have with that student. Would you agree with any of that? Or am I thinking about this maybe incorrectly?
You've got most of it right.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, is because the teacher is able to make, and detachment isn't a bad word in as far as holding students accountable. So as long as I hold a student accountable matter-of-factly, and as long as there's nothing personal between us, so as long as I'm not showing my displeasure, and as long as I'm not getting emotional about the misbehavior, and I don't because I'm just following through with what I said I'm going to do, and so it protects me from feeling those feelings, those emotions, and getting all stressed out. But what it also does is it not only improves your relationship with students, but it frees you to build really powerful, influential relationships with students. I mean, staggeringly so. And so in a classroom like that, the students absolutely love their teacher. And it frees you to be your silly self and to have a classroom that's happy, that students love coming to. And my number one goal as a teacher every year is the very first minute of the first day of school is that they love being in my class. Because if I have that, that gives me a lot of leverage. That makes my consequences matter. It makes that student reflect on their misbehavior and not want to miss a second of their time, being in timeout or disappointing the teacher, because they love being there and they love being part of the class and they like their teacher. And so when a teacher thinks they have a good relationship with the student because they smile a little bit, maybe they joke a little bit, so they think they get a good relationship, and so they try to use that. You're right, every time they try to use that to pull them aside, they're ruining the relationship. And with the rest of the class too. And then things progressively get worse and worse when you rely on that sort of method. As the year goes on, a student, you may have a pretty good relationship the first week or so of school. I mean, it craters. And by the end of the school year, the student won't even look you in the eye.
Yeah, and those are perhaps the most unpleasant places within a public school possible, those situations where relationships have gone so wrong. So it sounds like the relationship side really is that tier one. It takes care of most everything. And you've got your plan in place for those incidents that creep up, and you follow that in kind of a detached, matter-of-fact manner, all the while protecting the relationship because it's not personal to the kid. You've got, like you mentioned, that third-party set of rules. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I wonder if that connects to an observation that I've made where a teacher might come across as unpleasant to only a couple of students in a classroom because there's only a couple of students who chronically misbehave. But in so doing that, they really turn the entire class against them. Have you noticed that dynamic where kids really judge a teacher by how that teacher's treating that kid's peers?
Absolutely. And that's like the students will never say that. But when you treat one particular or two particular students a certain way, the other students know it. And, students observe more and know more often than teachers believe that they do. And that affects it affects the feeling tone in the room, and it affects it also affects like your own stress and calmness. So if there's one particular or a couple students that you're kind of battling with frequently, and it pulls you into being tense and stressed around them, you're going to be that way in front of the whole class, and the relationship is going to suffer. And then when you go down that road, you find yourself raising your voice at other students as well. And so it doesn't become just perfectly selectable. It's something that it becomes habitual. And teachers who are just lovely people turn into these, ogres when they get in front of their class because they just get pulled into it. And it's easy to do, which is why we really focus on, having that contract and separating accountability from your relationship with the students. And we can talk more about how to build strong relationships if you like.
Oh, I would love that, because it sounds like that's kind of this 80-20. That's the part that matters the most. So please elaborate. How does a teacher consistently build meaningful relationships, particularly with maybe students they don't naturally connect with?
Well, you're right. This is definitely in the 20%. So important. And it's much easier than most teachers think it is. And it's less building individual relationships, which are fine, but they take time. They pull you away from other students. And oftentimes when we try to build one-on-one relationships, and teachers tend to do this with difficult students or more challenging students. They try to build sort of one-on-one relationships, but it can also often be very awkward for the student. And it can make them more uncomfortable around you. And it can also make students who are shy or less socially comfortable, it can make them secretly dislike you. Because it's awkward for them and it makes them uncomfortable. And so a much better perspective and a much better way to approach building relationships is that you want to build a relationship with your class as a whole, not just with individual students. And the reason why we do that is we want them to come to us. And they come to us at sort of different times through the year. And what I mean by that is it may take 2 weeks for some students to start smiling at you and asking you questions about your life and things like that, which opens the door to building those closer one-on-one relationships. It may take a difficult student who's been yelled at for years by teachers. It may take them a couple of months. It may take a student who's particularly shy. It may take them 5 months to start coming to you one-on-one, but they still have a good relationship with you. In other words, they still respect you and like you and enjoy being in your class. And so the focus, instead of one-on-one relationships, the focus is on, again, building a relationship with the whole class. And the way you do that is really, really simple. It's just being consistently, day after day, pleasant. Just being nice, polite, respectful, and then embracing your true personality, which is really easy to do when you have that classroom management plan that takes care of the misbehavior. You let it do the dirty work for you, and it frees you to, dance in front of your students or be silly or create a conga line or really get into your subject matter and tell stories and all that wonderful stuff that kids love. And we do that with the whole class. And you've got this incredible leverage when the students love being there and they love you. And there's no animosity or hurt feelings when you hold them accountable. You end up not having to hold students accountable. You end up not even having to really rely on your classroom management. I shouldn't say not rely, but not use your classroom management plan just because the students they're all behaving. And that's the idea that by, a couple months or so in, it's rare that you even give a warning.
So this is maybe the opposite of, and I don't pretend to have my finger perfectly in the wind on teacher training, but in my own experience, that advice rings so true, and it might be the polar opposite of what I was taught while becoming a teacher. It was always, working those individual relationships first. Do you find that to be true? Is this because I'm feeling a little bit of cognitive dissonance, but what you're saying, like I mentioned, rings true, and I've already read your book, so I have a one-up on those listeners who haven't read your book. In your experience, does that seem novel to most teachers to start with the entire classroom and let them come to you?
No, I don't think I don't think they're taught that at all. And either it's like you said, it's the individual relationships, and it's the counseling sessions with the kids, and it's trying to convince them to behave, and it's trying to talk, every misbehavior through and ask why the student misbehaved, and prompt the student to explain what they could have done better, and all these things. And the student just tells you what you want to hear and doesn't truly reflect on their misbehavior. And at the same time, teachers are embracing these token economies, which are just about the worst thing you can do for kids. And so you combine all that, and the classrooms are chaos, and the kids are unmotivated, and their intrinsic desire to listen and learn and behave is just stripped from them. And that's what a lot of teachers are learning, and they show up to the classroom and they're wondering, gosh, why isn't this working? Why doesn't it work when I catch students being good? Why doesn't it work when why does it just work temporarily a lot of times teachers don't really get that at first, but when you reward students, it can work temporarily. And when we overpraise students, it may make the kids feel good in a second, and others are offended by it. Some students are offended by it because they feel like you're trying to buy their what is intrinsically enjoyable. But you can see why classroom management is an area that so many teachers are struggling with. And there's so much misinformation and terrible information out there.
This is so fascinating to me because I think it's almost a permission to avoid the things that make the job, miserable for some teachers. Everything you're saying not to do and just reflecting as you're speaking are the things I hate doing, because they don't feel natural. And the reason I think this rings true is a couple years ago in my classroom teaching experience, I did take a more whole class approach because I was wearing myself thin, fighting what I felt like were so many individual, separate battles, but just taking that classroom approach certainly seems to be the smart way to go about classroom management. So let's say you've got a teacher who let's say last year didn't go so great, they're on summer break. What's the first thing you'd suggest they begin to change to move in this direction? Because we know that wholesale change sometimes is difficult.
Get rid of all rewards, for sure. Just, make your classroom more intrinsically motivated. The kids will be a lot happier and a lot more motivated. Stop kneeling down and reteaching everything, so we have respect that kids can listen and learn. And that's another area of really teachers are getting this just really bad information about how much individual help to give. And then have a classroom management plan and commit to following it.
Where could teachers find? Do you include maybe a detailed classroom management plan in one of your other books that they could go out and get?
Uh, on the website, there are, I do have an e-guide for high school teachers and an e-guide for elementary teachers, and both of them are classroom management plans, detailed classroom management plans. For middle school teachers, it's sort of I recommend sixth grade using the elementary plan, eighth grade using the high school plan, and then seventh grade teachers, it's sort of a transitional time, and so they have to choose based on their own personal feelings and where they're teaching and the maturity level of their students and that kind of thing to make that decision.
Yeah, I'll definitely put those in the episode description because I think that'd be valuable not only to me but to many teachers to give them a better sense of what kind of plan they can rely on. And I'm sure in that plan you kind of explain which aspects you're communicating to students and how you go about that process as well. Does it include some of sort of those beginning of the year suggestions?
Exactly. It includes everything you need. So both the plans, you take them. They've been used, with thousands of teachers and just very, very successfully. You just follow it, plug it in. It's turnkey, and it works, and it sets you up with the kind of classroom that we're talking about. So one where you don't have to rely on bribing students.
So just to broaden this a bit, in my, again, anecdotal observations, teachers who seem to be happiest in their job have well-managed classrooms, and teachers who sometimes are appearing to be on the verge of burnout, maybe their classroom management has declined. And I always thought that perhaps they didn't like their job and that caused classroom management to go poorly. But now I'm wondering if maybe they just didn't have classroom management down and that's causing the burnout. So I'm wondering what your general sense of the teaching profession is. Is burnout an increasingly difficult problem teachers face? And if it is, how much of that might be this whole classroom management side of things?
It's definitely a problem, and I think it's all classroom management. I think that's the secret, not only to enjoying your job, but to be effective at your job. And I don't believe you can be effective without good classroom management. On the other hand, with good classroom management, everything just becomes so much easier. And the other thing is when you have good classroom management skills, your students are on task so much longer than in the other classrooms around you, than your colleagues, that you don't have to worry about test scores. You don't have to worry about reading levels and all that kind of stuff, because it all increases and improves naturally. You don't have to worry about rushing through things and try to squeeze everything in, because you have so much more time, an incredible amount of time and luxury to talk to your students about, the silly thing that happened to you on the way to school, or to stand up and go say hello to their friends, or to stand up, take a break, and do some yoga exercises, or go outside and have some fun. And all those things help increase that feeling of love for being in your classroom. So just like bad strategies snowball and make things worse and worse, good strategies snowball and make things better and better and stronger on both ends.
So I think it's safe to make the statement that you claim this set of skills is fairly independent of teacher personality and style, maybe their primary style of teaching. Is that a claim you'd make? And if it is, how do you support that claim? I'm like, how can we know that this approach really does work independent of those factors?
Even though I do write a bit about personality and leadership and ways to make that leverage that you have with students stronger as far as being calm. And I go as far as giving specific techniques and ways to be more present and to be calm and to rely on your classroom management. So it's not just what to do, but I go into detail on how to do it. And I really do believe that anyone can do this. And so nothing is dependent on your particular personality. I'm introverted by nature. I'm a shy person by nature. And it works as well for me as someone who is much more outgoing. And so it isn't in any way dependent on that. And you can still be you. In fact, it's the more you are, the more unique you are, the stronger those relationships are, and the more students enjoy being in your classroom. Your uniqueness is your strength, and it's what draws people to you. And so, so not only do I think anyone can do it, no matter who they are, their personality. I think embracing that is a wonderful thing. And so you're not, when you stand in front of your students, you're really you. You're not a robot, or you're not trying to behave be a certain way other than pleasant. And so I go to great lengths. I mean, everything that I do in the entire website is teacher friendly and best for students. So if it isn't easy for teachers, it isn't simple for teachers, if it isn't doable for teachers, then I don't write it, I don't recommend it. At the same time, if it isn't, in my opinion, best for students and backed by research, I don't do the research, but the research is there as far as rewards, that kind of thing. But as long as it's best for kids in the long run, then if I have those two things, then I'll recommend a strategy.
What would you say to a principal or instructional coach, implementation specialist, whatever title the district's using? They stumble across a classroom. They immediately, I think you mentioned Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink in your book, if I'm not mistaken. They immediately sense something's off. Where would you suggest a leader or coach begin in the process of helping a teacher who does not have this squared away?
I think the most obvious would be starting with a classroom management plan. As well as a few other things, including making sure that the environment is neat. Believe it or not, just cleanliness is so important. There's so many sloppy rooms, and with that is usually a chaotic environment. But I think it's really, really important for a coach or a principal to explain why. I think why is really, really important. I think teachers want to know why, and they need to know why in order to buy in. And it trickles down to students too. And I talk about how important it is that we explain to students why we have a classroom management plan. What's in it for them? How does it benefit them? And it really is all about them. We're doing it to protect their right to learn and enjoy being part of the class. And so it's all about the why. So it's the strategies and principles that really work predictably, no matter who you are, where you teach, or anything like that. There's no blaming, the kids or the environment or the neighborhood or the school or anything like that. It's taking responsibility and saying, yes, it's really doable. We're not going to make excuses. Here's how we do it. Here's why we do it. And I think when you answer the why, that's when teachers, the light comes on. It's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you talk to someone who's been using a reward system or a token economy. And when you explain to them that they're really shooting themselves in the foot, and here's why, and here's how your life can be so much easier, so you don't have to continue to make more and more rewards and keep buying more and more and feel terrible, because deep down teachers feel terrible because they're manipulating kids. They're just trying to get through the day, and it's hurting that student long term. It's not good for them long term. And so when the light comes on and they realize that and they understand all the whys, then you've really got them, I think. And you can transform not only a classroom but an entire school.
Just to, I guess, maybe heap a bit of praise on your latest book. You share this wonderful story, and it's full of amazingly told stories. I think you're a fabulous storyteller, where in your classroom you started taking sort of long shots at the jar with your tokens. And I just thought that was a perfect example of, like, in that one story, it kind of encapsulates all the whys of why a token system can be harmful, and then how to transition out of a token system. So I suppose we'll have to save that story for when they go out there and get your book. I can imagine there may be teachers out there who are feeling as though the job is the dream they imagined before they went to teacher school. And I can imagine there are teachers out there now who feel like the job has morphed into something that they didn't intend. It's not the pleasant experience they wanted for themselves. And I think your latest book is the conversion of the mindset. It's how to take maybe something that's not so pleasant right now if you're a teacher, and regain the passion for the field. So, and I'm wondering, I will turn this into a question soon, I promise. But I'm wondering, when you sat down to write your latest book, because it's not focused exclusively on classroom management, what was your motivation? Were you noticing that more and more teachers were maybe losing, I don't know if losing the passion's the right word, but just struggling? Because I feel like you wrote this book as an antidote to that.
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of emails from really, really distressed teachers, really, really stressed out teachers and unhappy teachers. And I've worked in schools where the morale is just at the bottom, just rock bottom, just teachers overworked, far too much on their plate, being encouraged to do things that make things harder in the classroom, confusion, wondering if maybe they should switch careers. All those sorts of things are just palpable, not only from just me, all the teachers that I'm in contact every week through my blog, but I still work as a public school teacher. And so all of that just led me to write that latest book, and it really poured out of me. And so there's lots of whys in that book, kind of explaining why, and I did rely on a lot of storytelling, and but it's my compassion, because I hate seeing that, especially when I know it doesn't have to be that way. You know, I know firsthand you don't have to feel this way. And it's gotten to the point where a lot of teachers feel hopeless. They think it's not possible, and they're shocked when they discover that, oh my gosh, this actually works. Incredible. And so yeah, definitely that's been on my mind for years, and so it was cathartic writing that book.
You know, it's almost cathartic reading it, because so many of those ideas I maybe personally sort of half knew, but would almost feel guilty about, or like maybe I'm heading down the wrong road. Like, do I really need to be so crazy about keeping my classroom clean? You know, people are like, why do you throw away everything? But it's really full of practical suggestions, and kind of giving teachers permission to love their jobs again. And so, and not to just, I promise my listeners, I'm not just trying to go get you to buy the book, but I want our teacher listeners to love their jobs. And I don't know if I've read something, because I'm going in my 8th year, I don't know if I've come across information that's inspired me more. It felt like the week before my first year again. So thank you for writing that book, and thank you for your time here today. I want to certainly give you the last word. So is there anything else you want to mention about our conversation here today? And if teachers want to know more about you, where should they go?
Well, I was just thinking as you were saying that a lot of teachers, when they read that book and they read this stuff on the website, it's like, oh, I've been doing this privately for years. And so just like what you said about keeping your room clean and so those are the things that resonate with teachers. So it's a lot of common sense stuff that many teachers are already doing. And so so I just wanted to say that it's really, there's not a lot monumental. It's things that a lot of teachers are already doing, but kind of give you permission, to do those things. And just if teachers want to learn more about my stuff, just smartclassroommanagement.com.
Well, that's easy enough. Well, I can't thank you enough for your time today. I've stolen, with our technology problems, I've stolen actually about an hour now. So thank you so much for your time, and wish you the best moving forward.
Oh, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. I enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, there are several ways you can support our work. First and foremost, you can subscribe to our podcast via iTunes Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or just using our RSS feed. And giving us reviews helps more than you think. If you want to provide direct support, we have a support tab on our main page, we'redoingitwrong.com, that links to our Patreon account. Patreon's a neat system that allows you to pledge a dollar amount per episode produced and set a monthly maximum. So you only pay when you get new content you love. But most importantly, we just appreciate your listenership. Thank you.